here's a common thing I hear. So, if you go to someone and say, well, why do you do it like this? Like you ask about someone's process, let's just say, and you're the outsider, because commonly you get the best advice from people that are looking at this new. They come from a field that's not similar. They're looking at a problem for the first time. And the answer very commonly in a lot of industries, well, that's the way we've always done it. Now, to your point, like as an engineer, you're like, well, that's not a good reason to do anything. The question is why, right? But it's a very common question and answer that you hear back and forth in various industries. Like that's how we've always done it. And then you get into these like, well, you give examples, I think, in where it's like, well, the cart goes there and up that because it's got to get to the same level as that. And it's like, well, why don't you just, cut out to get the cart at the same level before, and then you don't have to go up or down or those kind of processes. So I think a lot about, how people do things out of roteness, or it's like inertia. Once they've done it, they continue to do that process.
Yeah, for sure. And I think part of that is just a lot of times, I talk about in the book about like technological, and process knowledge and just learning how to sort of do these processes in how to make them work. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times that knowledge is not particularly like, it's quite opaque, and It's not necessarily, it's locked up in people's heads. It's maybe separated from the people on the, factory floor that are doing it. The people in the factory maybe only have like a small visibility into a single part of the process. And it may just not be clear, what specifically is needed to make this process work, and what does not make this process work. So these things sort of evolve over time, and it may not necessarily be amazingly obvious what specifically is making it work at all.
Sure. Talking about evolving, one of the other things you bring up early in the book is kind of like, I'll call it the rate of change in processes and technology. So for example, you mentioned that in the 1930s, the typical light bulb had reached about 16 lumens then, okay? And you point out that even an incandescent light today has about 17 lumens, like the modern incandescent. How often have you seen a process like that where we can go 50, 60, 70 years and the output hasn't changed that much?
Yeah, so that's a little bit more about that specifically. So that's like a measure of that's called luminous efficiency. So it's like lumens per watt. So how much light you get for a given amount of electricity. And so with incandescent light bulbs, there's like laws of physics that say when you heat a piece of metal to incandescence or whatever, you can at most get this amount of light out of it using this particular process, right? There's just only so much light that the laws of physics will allow you to produce. And so, if you want to get more light for a given amount of electricity, you need to produce it using something other than incandescence, right? And so we've seen a whole series of evolution of light bulbs that basically work by these different mechanisms, right? So like fluorescent lights, which can produce more light per unit of electricity, and then now we have like LEDs, which produce even more light per unit of electricity. And I would say it's not uncommon to see you get some particular industrial process that it works at some level of efficiency, and then you just don't ever figure out an obviously better way of doing that. So, light bulbs are one thing where we've found increasingly better technologies that can produce light for, using increasingly small amounts of electricity. But we were talking a little bit about aluminum earlier. Aluminum is still produced using the same industrial process, what's called the Hall-Héroult process. This was discovered in the late 19th, early 20th century, and this is still the industrial process that is used to produce aluminum. And there's similar to light bulbs, there's laws of physics that limit how energy efficient this production process can be, how much, how many kilowatts or kilowatt hours of electricity it takes to produce a given amount of aluminum. Mm-hmm. And as over time, we've gradually gotten closer and closer to that asymptote.
That limit. Yeah.
But we, haven't found a successor process yet.
Sure.
The nitrogen, which is a very, very, industrial nitrogen production, producing ammonia, which is very, very important because that's what we use to produce industrial fertilizer. Yep. And that's synthetic fertilizer. And that's what, feeds the world of 8 billion people.
Yep.
We still produce that almost entirely with a process that was discovered in the early 20th century called the Haber-Bosch process. And it's a very similar story there, where there's like laws of physics that say how efficiently this process could work, and we've gotten like closer and closer and closer to this like theoretical minimum, right? And we haven't found a obvious successor process. Yeah. So yeah, it's not uncommon to sort of find some way of doing something and then continually like refine and improve it over time. And then just not find an obviously superior way of doing that. And sometimes, if there's like, it's not necessarily always the case that there's like laws of physics that tell you exactly how efficient your process can be, right? That's, certain things are like that. Many other things are not like that. But just over time, this thing maybe gets like, more and more and more efficient. But maybe the efficiencies become harder and harder and harder to get, and you just don't find a successor processor. We haven't found one yet.
Yeah. Well, I think the other thing too that always shows up is, so again, let's just use the LED, because I think it's, if someone says, what's the best picture technology I've ever seen for paradigms and shaping the future and things you should think about, I'd say the LED. So for example, to your point, it's highly efficient. So there were people, prior to the LED that are thinking, if we get something more efficient, we'll use way less electricity. Well, we get more light per watt. Yes, that's true. So then if you and I looked at our houses and said, hey, how many LED lights do we have compared to the home of 1970? The answer is way, way more. So we didn't use less electricity. Our houses are better lit, which is a paradigm that most people would have missed, because ultimately with the cost of something going lower, the quality of life has gone up. So you tend to consume at lower prices. And so there's those kind of paradigms where it's like the predictability of the outcome ends up following rules, but it's not necessarily what people always expected in their own minds, if that makes sense. So
that what you're talking about there is that very famous Jevons paradox.
Jevons paradox,
right?
to a T.
Yeah. Where the the efficiency of something improves, so the amount of whatever it consumes for each one declines. But because that it gets cheaper, and because it gets cheaper, people find more use. It becomes more widely used, just like you said, right?
Exactly.
Once it's cheaper, it can be used in places that it couldn't before, and so actual total consumption of whatever it is
goes
up.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if it worked like that specifically, but for lights, but it wouldn't surprise me.
Well, and he used coal in his case, because we're going to run out. We're not going to use any of it. But obviously, as they found more uses, they found more coal, and hence that drove Jevons paradox. You had something else, kind of on the British history side, or the UK history side. The idea of the industry or geography being important to driving certain inefficiencies in certain processes. So you use like the Newcomen engine compared to the James Watt's engine in comparison. And I think you pointed out that like the Newcomen engine was used particularly in the UK, particularly on mining. And so here you have other technologies going on, but in this geography, in this vertical, it's kind of one dominant technology. Are there a lot of other places you've seen where geography or vertical can really decide the technology and everything else gets crowded out?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Kind of, what I was getting at that in the book, and comparing the UK and the US, is that basically these like geographical factors and the sort of specific environmental constraints that different places are operating under, kind of in some ways dictate the sort of technology that makes sense there, and what the way that sort of processes kind of spring up. And with the Newcomen engine, a kind of interesting example of, and the Watt engine, a kind of interesting example of that is that the Newcomen engine was really only almost good for like powering, being used at coal mines, because it was so inefficient that it only made sense when you could basically get almost the fuel for free. And at sort of coal mines, they had all this what was called slack coal, which is like pieces of coal that were too small to sell.
Sure.
And so you could feed this coal into these Newcomen engines. And like, if you're getting your coal for like free, or like very nearly free, then it makes sense to use this like really, inefficient engine. And then, this got replaced with like the Watt engine, which was like much more efficient. But the Watt engine was like, it required a lot more like precision engineering, and it actually was, I think, difficult to, I don't remember the exact specifics here, but I think it was like somewhat difficult to use in the US because we didn't have like the engineering knowledge and capabilities of doing this like precision manufacturing. And this was all, so it was like hard for this engine to diffuse in this place without with sort of this like different like sociocultural fabric where you don't necessarily have this, machining expertise and capabilities that you did in sort of the UK. And so, yeah, this kind of goes back a little to what we were talking about, like just with the case of electricity, is sort of the geographical factors in a given place will shape and influence that kind of technology and sort of production processes that can like take root and kind of be exploited in a different place, in a given place.